Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Today we're stepping into, well, kind of a hidden world. Imagine a place where the lines between what some call mental illness and maybe deliberate manipulation get really blurry. A place where national interests might converge in secret and where someone's sanity is just constantly under question. It's an institution unlike any other, really operating way beyond the usual spotlight.
It really is. What our source material reveals today is a deep dive into Blacksite Berlin, also known sometimes as penal psychiatry or Strafpsychiatry in German. And this isn't, according to the account we're examining, just some standard medical facility, no. Our source, the buyer, details it as a disguised secret prison. He claims the personnel there, the people running it, seem to be acting alternately for German, American, and Russian states.
Wow. Okay. All three.
All three, and all under this pervasive clandestine umbrella of what he created as an international deep state. An unseen network, as he frames it, where global interests operate outside public view. It's a place where, the normal rules of psychology and justice just seem to be on a whole different level, hidden.
That description alone just paints an extraordinary picture. So our mission today, and your mission listening, is to navigate this complex, often pretty shocking landscape. We're doing this through the unique firsthand account of one individual. We're calling him the buyer from the World Succession Deed 1400, or just the buyer for short. You'll hear directly about the incredible characters he met inside, the day-to-day life as he saw it, and his really searing critique of the whole system that held him there.
Exactly. And this deep dive, it really encourages us to see things through the buyer's lens. It's not just about, individual stories of being locked up or perceived madness. It's about trying to understand a system that, as his account suggests, operates outside normal checks and balances. It really challenges you to think about how one person's perception, their experience, can challenge everything we thought we knew about mental health institutions, especially when those institutions are supposedly functioning, as he claims, as a secret arm of some larger unseen network.
So what does this mean for us, for this deep dive? We're going to immerse ourselves fully in the buyer's unique perspective. We'll explore his detailed account as the factual narrative he presents it to be. This lets us understand the world as he experienced it, from inside Blacksite Berlin. Our goal is to faithfully convey the ideas, the experiences in his source material. We're not here to endorse or refute them, but to step into his reality, understand the events as he documents them. Okay, let's unpack this. All right, let's start with a figure who really seems to embody the extremes within Blacksite Berlin, the Neukölln cannibal. This individual, according to the buyer, gives us a stark, frankly terrifying example of the challenges and dangers inside this secret prison. Sets a chilling tone right away.
Yes, what jumps out immediately is the sheer level of paranoia and violence described. The buyer says the cannibal had been confined since about 2005 and describes him as, quote, extremely insane and dangerous. He's presented as just a constant source of conflict on the ward, really driven by this severe delusion of poisoning. He absolutely believed, with total conviction, that staff and other patients were sneaking into his cell to poison his drinks with drugs.
And here's where the buyer connects it back to himself, offering this really chilling insight. He observes that while this specific delusion in the cannibal's case was, imagined, this kind of poisoning paranoia wasn't uncommon in the Blacksite. And this, he claims, makes it dangerously easy for the insidious antipsychologists to actually poison him, the buyer. Without anyone believing him, they just say he was crazy. It's a really striking point about how blurred those lines could become.
Absolutely, and it points to the oppressive nature of the environment itself. The buyer's account details the constant manifestations of the cannibal's paranoia. Anyone just passing his door, immediate suspicion. He thinks they're either leaving his room or trying to get in, like he's caught them in the act. Even someone just walking behind him would send him into a paranoid defensive state.
Just constant vigilance.
Totally. And when no one was visible, he'd suspect cocaine or LSD had been secretly put on his doorknob. He'd meticulously inspect his instant coffee for dark spots, which he identified as cocaine traces. It paints this picture of a mind just trapped, always under siege.
It sounds completely unbearable, not just for him, but for everyone around him, too. The buyer says he was in a state of highest tension, completely paranoid, and in full defense mode, making any interaction, as he put it, like Russian roulette. You never knew what self-defense film was running in his head. The buyer himself made sure to avoid his door whenever possible. That tells you something about the danger.
Right. And this constant state naturally led to frequent clashes. The buyer talks about a specific ongoing conflict between the cannibal and another patient he nicknamed Kindergarten Shrek. This guy, described as naive, just kept failing to avoid the cannibal's door. Seems small, but it had huge consequences. This proximity, the buyer notes, triggered severe paranoid delusions in the cannibal. He'd believe that kindergarten Shrek was targeting him, poisoning him, trying to steal his stuff.
So that led to, what, shouting matches? Worse.
Aggressive confrontations, yeah. Shouting matches, threats. Nurses constantly had to intervene to stop actual physical fights. Often, the only thing that worked was the threat of ISO, solitary confinement. It paints this picture of just constant, low-level warfare inside the Blacksite, all driven by this profound delusion and fear.
So how did Blacksite Berlin, this supposed secret prison, handle such extreme behavior? The buyer's account must be revealing there.
It is, yeah. The cannibal was frequently locked in his room or sent to ISO because of his threats. But in one really striking instance, he went on a hunger strike in ISO, refused all medication, and surprisingly, he was released from solitary confinement without being force-fed or force-medicated, which definitely raises questions about their protocols or maybe the lack of them.
And how did he react to being released like that?
The buyer says he came out ecstatic, like very proud of his successful coup to fool the psychologists. But in the very same breath, he just unleashed massive paranoid delusions, including murder threats against several other patients. And the buyer's assessment of this is just blunt. He finds the psychologist absolutely incompetent, especially given the cannibal's proven history as a murderer. It really highlights what he saw as a critical failure. And that history is crucial context for the buyer's view. His personal account plus external press articles confirm the horrific nature of the crime. Seems it was October 2004, maybe 2005. He arranged a homosexual BDSM sex date in his apartment in Berlin, Neukölln. He bound his victim, stabbed him in the neck with a screwdriver, and then dismembered the body.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Various organs stored in the fridge. Particular attention, horrifically, paid to the penis, which he apparently salted and stored in the fridge. The exact amount consumed was, quote, not ascertainable.
And he actually cited the Cannibal of Rotenburg in court.
He did, cited him as his great role model. The court sentenced the guy, who was 41 then, to 13 years and immediate transfer to a psychiatric clinic. They deemed him to have significantly diminished culpability because of these escalating cannibalism fantasies, but, and this is key, posed a significant danger to the public. So, this history, as the buyer recounts it, makes the Blacksite's handling of his successful coup even more baffling and, frankly, deeply concerning, especially within this context of a supposed secret prison managing a highly dangerous individual.
Beyond the violence, you mentioned his fixations.
Right, the buyer also details the cannibal's persistent sexual fixations within the Blacksite, described him as permanently horny, sending rows of love letters to patients across whole corridors, sometimes 8 at once. He developed a particular obsession with one patient nicknamed a Sadin. When they briefly shared an airlock and bathroom, the cannibal would supposedly accidentally stumble into the bathroom whenever a Sadin was showering or drying off, just casting these unobtrusive glances.
That sounds incredibly disturbing. And the letters.
Even more so. He wrote pages and pages to a Sadin, explicitly detailing his fantasies. Hard BDSM sex followed by murder, dismemberment, and the consumption of a Sadin's parts, culminating in the pleasurable consumption of a Sadin's best bit. A Sadin, understandably, was disgusted, eventually just stopped reading them, threw them out, or sent them straight to the psychologist. This led to the cannibal being moved, but the obsession apparently just continued.
Did he find anyone receptive to it?
In a very twisted way, yes. The buyer says he found more success with another patient, the toy boy. This patient, when he needed money, would apparently allow the cannibal to live out his homosexual fantasies, though the source is clear, not the cannibalistic ones, for a fee. The buyer even recounts this absurd detail. The cannibal offered another patient, the chainsaw massacre guy, €20 to shave his backside. He'd compiled a whole list of intimate hairstyles with prices. It's just the strange, unsettling mix of the horrific and the bizarre that the buyer describes as life inside. Reveals the kind of desperate, peculiar transactions that went on.
Yeah, the buyer's account of the Neukölln cannibal really shows, beyond the horror, this deep tension between genuine psychosis and the institution's perceived inability, or maybe unwillingness, to really contain or treat it, especially if you accept his framing of it as a secret prison where the staff's motives and competence are constantly in question. It makes you consider the huge danger of a hidden system like that, especially when it seems to fail at its most basic job, protection. Okay, moving from that extreme, let's turn to the fisting victim. This individual's story, according to the buyer, highlights a really profound and peculiar desire for control. even if it meant getting back into confinement through these outrageous acts.
Yeah, what's really striking here is the sheer audacity of how he got back into the Blacksite. The buyer describes him pretty bluntly as a perverse BDSM freak from another station who'd actually been discharged. But he reportedly developed homesickness for the Blacksite, longing, as the buyer puts it, to be constantly bossed around, suppressed, and patronized. That alone says a lot about the complex psychology, what could draw someone back to such a place.
And his method for getting back in was something else.
Completely. He announced in a mock run at a Berlin subway station, got a sports bag full of weapons, and just sat there waiting for the police. When they initially ignored him, which the buyer found just crazy, he literally had to turn himself in. It really speaks to the strange pull this institution had for him, despite its supposed nature as a secret prison, maybe a craving for that structure, that control.
So once he was back inside, what was his behavior like?
Initially, very conspicuous, always looking for arguments, rampaging, throwing full water bottles around, and more dramatically, he repeatedly took over this central spiral staircase for hours, threatening to jump headfirst. Used it like a stage, apparently, to engage the Blacksite staff in these dialogues, trying to prevent his dive. He'd also decorated his room with pornographic, homosexual BDSM images, clearly making his presence and preferences known.
Definitely making his presence known.
Yeah.
Almost theatrically. The buyer mentions he was a pensioner, right?
Right.
But had money managed by a caregiver.
Yeah, so he had more funds than most patients and liked to flaunt it, especially trying to attract others. He'd proudly parade around in this oversized 300 Emporio Armani t-shirt. Small detail, but it shows his attempts to assert some kind of status, maybe desirability, in that confined social world.
And when those attempts failed?
Well, he came up with a new plan for satisfaction. He declared he absolutely wanted to be fixated, restrained, so he rampaged and threatened until they physically restrained him. And a nurse involved later reported, apparently quite shocked, that the fisting victim had a massive erection during the fixation. This really points towards the psychological dynamics, aligns with sadomasochism, classified under ICD-10 as a disorder of sexual preference involving pain, humiliation, bondage. It suggests a deliberate seeking of control through submission and pain.
And his actions escalated beyond just threats, right? There was some harm.
Yes, a disturbing pattern. In one incident, he poured hot water from a kettle over his own head, scalding himself. Looked like a boiled lobster for days, the buyer says, who then sarcastically advised him to use hotter oil next time for a real Freddy Krueger look. Grim humor. He also threw ceramic plates, actually hitting a nurse in the head. So, willingness to harm others, too.
And the arson incident, that sounds incredibly dangerous.
It was, and it reveals the serious risks he posed. The buyer saw it happen from the security-glassed atrium, watched the fisting victim sneak into the kitchen, put towels on the stove, pour oil on them, turn on the stove, and just leave. Soon after, a fire alarm went off. Luckily, they put it out. But the buyer recalls him previously showing off newspaper articles about a fire at his old apartment, posing proudly with firefighters. The buyer suspected he set that fire, too. Shows a pattern.
So what finally calmed him down? You mentioned forced medication.
Right. After all this, including initially refusing medication, he was forcibly medicated. And the buyer notes this surprisingly led to success, making him very calm. It's a stark example of the Blacksite's methods, chemical intervention, and the profound impact it could have, ending that cycle of chaos and self-sabotage.
The story of the fisting victim really shows that complex interplay, doesn't it, between deep psychological needs and the institution itself. His deliberate attempts to get back in, to provoke reactions. It highlights how for some, the very system of control can get tangled up with their identity, their satisfaction. Makes you question what freedom even means when someone actively seeks confinement, and what that reveals about the psychological landscape inside a place perceived as a secret prison. Okay, now let's shift gears to a case with a much higher public profile, a politically charged one, the von Weizsäcker killer. This segment seems to reveal complex motives behind a famous murder and, crucially, the Blacksite's controversial role afterwards adds another layer to this place.
Yes, his stay in Blacksite, Berlin was, as the buyer tells it, quite short. The buyer details the brief incarceration of the man who murdered the son of Richard von Weizsäcker, who was Germany's former federal president. The killer's justification, according to the buyer, was rooted in this deep belief that Richard von Weizsäcker was involved in Agent Orange dealings back in the 60s.
Agent Orange, the defoliant used in Vietnam.
Exactly. Produced by Monsanto and Bayer AG, sprayed extensively by the U.S. Army, caused widespread contamination, poisoning. Millions still suffer long-term effects, birth defects, cancer. So the killer believed the former president shared responsibility for this devastation.
And he extended that responsibility to the son.
He did. Believed the son, who was a doctor, should bear hereditary guilt and had to die for his father's actions. He used a public lecture the doctor was giving to carry out his revenge plan, stabbing him in public. The killer saw himself as a fighter for a just cause. And because of that, he vehemently disagreed with being placed in Blacksite, Berlin. Saw it as totally unjust confinement for someone acting on principle. His principle, anyway.
So how did he protest this perceived injustice from inside?
His protest was profound and ultimately tragic. As a direct challenge, he started a very rigid hunger strike. It lasted for weeks and months. The buyer describes him becoming Holocaust-thin, deep dark circles under his eyes, gray hair, just a frail overall appearance. His body was clearly shutting down.
And the clinic, the Blacksite.
Yeah.
What do they do?
According to the buyer, nothing. Despite the obvious severe weight loss, he was not force-fed, which raises huge ethical questions, right? He eventually gave up the hunger strike, ordered a large meal supposed to arrive in 6 days. Tragically, he died 2 days before the food got there. He had starved to death inside the Blacksite walls.
Starved to death. The buyer must have had strong words about that.
Extremely strong. His accusation is stark, unambiguous. He firmly believes the clinic is responsible for the patient starving to death. Argues they should force-fed him and not watched idly as he miserably starved. This raises serious questions about the ethics within the Blacksite. Was it an oversight, or, as the buyer implies, a systemic failure? Maybe even, within the secret prison context, something intentional to remove a politically awkward figure.
Do external reports confirm this?
Press reports do confirm that George S., the murderer, was found dead in his room in a psychiatric hospital on April 18th. No signs of foul play reported. He'd been sentenced in July 2020 to 12 years and placement in a psychiatric hospital. During the trial, he'd said he harbored decades of hatred against the von Weizsäcker family. Prosecutors called the act senseless, committed by a psychologically significantly disturbed man. But the buyer's interpretation frames it within this context of perceived justice, which is crucial for understanding the Blacksite environment he describes.
Yeah, the von Weizsäcker killer story really brings the ethical ambiguities, the potential dangers of a place like Blacksite, Berlin, into sharp focus. The buyers claim that they let a patient starve, especially one with such a political motive. It suggests a chilling disregard for life, a system operating outside normal oversight. Makes you wonder what responsibilities get dropped when an institution is seen as a secret prison, maybe serving a deep state agenda. Okay, next up we encounter the pimp with special requests. A patient whose long-term stay in Blacksite, Berlin seems to contrast with a criminal past, some peculiar spending habits, and maybe most surprisingly, he was apparently nearing release from this so-called secret prison.
Yeah, what's really striking is the sheer length of time, 20 years. The buyer introduces this German patient, been in the Blacksite for 2 decades, yet he had special privileges like going out alone on excursions and was apparently close to release.
That's a fascinating contradiction, right? Long-term inmate in this highly restrictive place, but somehow deemed ready to go back out.
What was his background? How did he end up there for so long? Well, the buyer mentions he had hearing damage from standing too close to speakers at the Love Parade in Berlin. Random detail. His initial crimes were supermarket and bank robberies, apparently to provide for a girlfriend. That got him his first 63-year, the legal order for psychiatric detention in Germany.
And he got a second one inside the Blacksite.
He did, for a failed attempt to take a psychologist hostage right there within the institution. So it points to this consistent pattern of defiance, maybe desperation. His behaviors were deeply entrenched, even inside.
And he had some financial escapades inside, too, the Xbox story.
Oh yeah, quite illustrative. An Xbox One was on sale cheap, under €200. The buyer and another patient gave this guy 400 Garba combined to buy 2 for them. Instead of getting the consoles, he just fled with the money, as the buyer puts it, blew it all in one day in a brothel. Then, same night, he voluntarily turned himself back in, completely broke. Shows this weird cycle. Impulsivity, instant gratification, then back to confinement.
Did you ever pay them back?
He did apologize, apparently, and spent the next few months paying off the debt. And the buyer, showing his usual pragmatism for navigating the Blacksite social dynamics, made sure the other patient got paid back first. Because that guy was very angry and wanted to teach him a lesson. The buyer wanted to avoid a fight, avoid a potential transfer that might stop him getting his own money back. Smart move in that environment.
But the most revealing detail was about the brothel spending, right? The special requests.
Exactly. The buyer asked him, how do you spend €400 that fast on prostitutes? They're usually 50, 100. And the patient confessed he had perverse special requests, which, as the buyer dryly noted, explained a lot. It hints at something deeper, a complexity to his desires, maybe connecting his psychology to his specific sexual preferences and his criminal patterns.
So the pimp with special requests. His story shows these weird forms of agency, even in the most controlled place. Despite 20 years in what's described as a secret prison, he found ways to assert his desires, destructively sometimes, and navigate the Blacksite's informal economies. Highlights how deep patterns, criminal or sexual, just persist and find new ways to express themselves, even under that supposed watchful eye of an international deep state. Let's shift now to the Opal Astra terrorist, a patient whose personal conflicts escalated into, well, a full-blown terrorist act. His story really highlights the Blacksite's role, according to the buyer, in housing individuals with extremist ideologies, and the shocking path he saw to his own desired freedom.
Yeah, what's particularly striking is the unlikely connection he initially had with the buyer. The buyer describes this Iraqi patient who, like him, had a soft spot for video consoles. And the buyer, being resourceful, actually helped him set up an Xbox One according to the strict Blacksite rules, removing the Wi-Fi chip, setting up profiles, installing apps. The patient didn't have the language skills, so the buyer even handled calls with the specialist firm, did the paperwork, a moment of cooperation.
But this shared interest existed alongside deep ideological conflict.
Absolutely. This patient was profoundly against the clinic in Germany. Fervently wished to be deported back to Iraq, saw Germany as morally depraved. Yet he admitted to drinking alcohol, using drugs, visiting prostitutes in Germany, all things forbidden or frowned upon by Islamic law. This internal clash, this conflict between his actions and his stated beliefs, seems to have been a major driver for his radicalization.
So he decided to commit a terrorist act.
That's what the buyer reports. Caught in this conflict between Western values and Islam, he decided on this path. He claimed that when he finally decided on the rampage, he was actually possessed by an Islamic demon, a jinn. This narrative of possession adds another complex layer, blurring lines between mental illness, religious belief, and extremist action within the Blacksite.
His weapon was a car, an Opel Astra.
A blue Opel Astra, yeah. The buyer noted his affinity for cars. Apparently, he trained as an automotive mechatronics technician. He drove at breakneck speed, swerving between Berlin streets and the city highway, rammed about 13 vehicles over an hour and a half. A prolonged, deliberate attack.
Trying to kill people.
Specifically targeted scooters, motorcycles, other cars with intent to kill, the buyer says. Fortunately, he failed to cause fatalities, but his victims were severely injured. One became paraplegic. His rampage only stopped when a final crash disabled his car.
In the scene when the police arrived.
Stark. He was found praying behind the totaled car, shouting, "Allah Akbar! God is great." He even tried to restart the completely wrecked car to continue his terror drive. The buyer explicitly labels this an Islamist terrorist attack with a car as a weapon against the infidels. That's his clear interpretation.
So he wanted deportation. Was that his real goal?
Officially, yes. He expressed a desire to be deported to Iraq, hoping it meant early release from Blacksite Berlin, wanting to live among like-minded people. But the buyer reveals his secret plan. Bribe his way to a new passport, different name, in Iraq, and then return to Berlin. Underscores the complex, maybe deceptive motives people inside this perceived secret prison might have, using the system for their own ends.
And the buyer's interactions with him were surprisingly casual?
Yeah, given the guy was in for terrorism. The buyer would jokingly greet him with a raised index finger, aggressive Allah Akbar, which the patient apparently enjoyed. He liked that the buyer, an absolute atheist, was at least not a Christian. The buyer deflected missionary attempts, too, responding to threats of hell by saying he was already used to hell on earth. Shows the buyer's sharp wit navigating even extremist views in that volatile place.
The Opel Astra terrorist. His story shows how these extremist ideas and personal conflicts can explode into violence, even within a place like Blacksite Berlin. His calculated plan for deportation and return also highlights the huge challenge of containing individuals who exploit systems for radical purposes. Makes you think about security when a facility, supposedly under multiple state interests, holds people with such dangerous and deceptive plans. Okay, from violent extremism, let's move to something different. A more benign, perhaps, but equally profound break from reality. This gives us a glimpse into the varied forms of delusion encountered in Blacksite Berlin. This is the story of the mechanical engineer.
Yeah, the contrast here is really interesting, especially after the violent figures we've discussed. The buyer describes an Afghan patient, only moderately Islamic religious, but otherwise totally insane. He was known on the ward as the mechanical engineer, and that nickname comes directly from his central delusion.
Which involved a microchip. That sounds very modern.
It does. He firmly believed he had a microchip implanted in his head, and he used this chip in his mind to build machines, cars, construction equipment, other things. He spent his days mentally constructing these things, totally convinced it was real.
And he thought he was getting paid for this mental construction.
Exactly. In his fantasy world, every machine he built resulted in money deposited into an account he couldn't access because he was locked up. So in his mind, he was already a multimillionaire, just trapped. He also believed the chip connected him directly to the Afghan embassy, who gave him orders for building machines and paid him immediately. And his most peculiar belief, according to the buyer, that he was unique because he knew that everyone actually carries a chip in their head, each linked to their own nation's embassy. It's incredibly elaborate, internally consistent.
How did the buyer react to this guy
Yeah.
after dealing with the cannibal and the arsonist?
Amusement, actually. Found him really funny. Said he could listen to him for hours. It highlights the buyer's ability to observe, even enjoy the quirks of others, despite the often bleak, dangerous surroundings. Finding those moments of levity must have been a survival mechanism.
The mechanical engineer's story really underscores that incredible diversity of human delusion, doesn't it? How internal realities can be built with such complexity, even when totally detached from objective reality. And his belief in universal microchips. It kind of subtly echoes that broader theme the buyer sees, right? Hidden control, unseen forces at play in Blacksite Berlin and the deep state. A more benign version of a world built on hidden tech and remote control. Our journey through Blacksite Berlin now brings us to NSU 2.0, also known as the arsonist. This individual introduces a really volatile element of politically motivated extremism and direct physical threat. Highlights the extreme dangers within the institution, this secret prison.
Yes, this patient, described by the buyer as a long-haired German, identified as a right-wing extremist. Before confinement, he'd sent right-wing terrorist letters signed NSU 2.0. And what's particularly alarming in the buyer's account is that he didn't stop doing this inside the institution. Shows an unwavering commitment to his ideology.
And the buyer wasn't impressed by his methods.
Not at all. Found the whole act of writing threats without follow-through dumb and embarrassing, especially since they were easily traceable. He wrote a threat to burn a fellow patient in his cell. Even more ridiculously, he wrote a death threat against the ultra-evil senior physician of the WSH and included his own name, date, and signature. The buyer sarcastically remarks it would have been smarter to simply attack her without warning. Just emphasizes how self-defeating it all was.
So what happened? He ended up in solitary.
Predictably, yeah. Ended up in ISO. Earned him the buyer's very harsh label, miserable whoremouth, or firmly Humulher is the direct German phrase the buyer used. Beyond the letters, he was apparently devouring Wehrmacht magazines and other right-wing extremist literature, immersing himself in that world. He also claimed to be a bomb-making expert, drew various bomb plans. The buyer doubted their feasibility, suspected they were just delusional ideas.
But then he claimed he could build atomic bombs.
Right. That's where, for the buyer, his credibility completely vanished. Claimed he could build atomic bombs as an individual. Without a physics degree, hundreds of staff, decades of research, government budgets, thousands of centrifuges, and, crucially, without uranium. Just pure megalomania.
The buyer had a pragmatic take on that, though, linking it to the deep state.
It did. A striking connection. Concluded that even if the guy was a genius, having that knowledge would be a massive reason for many secret agents worldwide to simply murder him. To stop the knowledge reaching rogue states or terrorists. He even mentions the assassination of Iranian nuclear scientists as a real parallel. The buyer reassures you, the listener, that the end of the world is not imminent because of him, but that observation subtly reinforces this idea of covert ops, aligning with the deep state context the buyer sees everywhere. A reminder of real dangers out there.
But despite those grand delusions, there was a very real danger he posed. Arson.
A very concrete danger, yes. Before the Blacksite, he was a fire devil, repeatedly set cars on fire, and he continued this inside the institution, constantly setting fires. This wasn't a leisure, this was active, dangerous behavior.
How bad did it get?
He'd wait for unobserved moments to set things ablaze. Terrifying in a locked facility. One major incident involved igniting several laundry bags outside the laundry room, alarmingly close to the buyer's own cell, luckily discovered and put out in time. But the buyer stresses the extreme danger. Barred windows, security glass, locked escape routes needing staff keys, no escape at night. Cells become death traps. Even the fire extinguishers, he notes, are idiotically locked away. a really stark critique of the Blacksite's basic safety.
That detail really hits home. Institutional failures, dangerous design, regardless of the patient's issues. So what do? Just transfer him.
After a series of fire, yeah, transferred him to another station, where, surprise, surprise, fires then started erupting. After more incidents, he was finally isolated, later moved to the Altbau, the old building. Shows the institution just struggling to contain this persistent, dangerous threat that endangered everyone in that secret prison.
The arsonist story really highlights that terrifying reality, doesn't it? Housing people with extremist views and a history of dangerous actions in a place the buyer sees as a secret prison. His actions expose huge vulnerabilities in safety, security, jeopardizing lives. Shows how perceived incompetence or maybe conflicting agendas within that system, perhaps influenced by the deep state the buyer believes in, could have incredibly dangerous real-world consequences for everyone locked inside. Okay, our next encounter is with the 4 Blocks bouncer, a patient whose story seems to weave together a past involving physical strength, even a TV appearance, with these profound financial delusions and acts of, well, self-justice. Another complex facet of life in Blacksite, Berlin.
Yeah, the buyer describes him first physically. A severely obese African man, over 180 kilograms, shirts like tent dimensions. And what's fascinating is how he used this size. Apparently, repeatedly smuggled cell phones into the station and traded them. The buyer himself occasionally borrowed one, got his first smartphone experience that way. He notes he could have bought his own, but had no one outside to top up a prepaid card. A small but really telling detail about the isolation inside this secret prison.
He had a serious health crisis too, right? Pneumonia.
Yeah, severe pneumonia, yeah. Led to 4 months in an artificial coma in the hospital. When he was discharged, severely mobility impaired, but against expectations, just as fat despite all that time on artificial feeding, his body just defied expectations.
And his past life, bodybuilding.tv.
Quite a contrast to his state in the Blacksite. He showed the buyer his Facebook profile, old photos from his bodybuilder days, impressively thick arms. The buyer dryly notes those days were definitely over. Around the time of those photos, he'd actually appeared as a bouncer in the German TV series 4 Blocks. So a link to public recognition, physical power, very different from confinement.
How did he end up in the Blacksite then? A real estate dispute.
Exactly, a very worldly conflict for someone ending up there. After the TV show, while still free, he got into a real estate deal. Rented and renovated an apartment in Berlin at his own expense, planning to sublet for profit. But the agent took his money, didn't pay him back what was owed. He got, as the buyer puts it, ripped off.
And his response led to his incarceration.
His response was to beat up the real estate agent, an act the buyer finds understandable. Notes the patient prefers to solve his problems himself rather than go through legal channels, which the buyer actually approves of as more direct justice. This act of self-justice, bypassing the formal system, is what landed him in Blacksite, Berlin, a place where maybe that kind of direct action fits, in a strange way, with the buyer's view of a flawed system influenced by a deep state.
But after he was confined, his talk became less comprehensible, the frame system.
Yeah, much of what he spoke about was harder to follow, the buyer observed, especially this constant talk of a frame system. In this system, he mentally stored money, transferred it, did stock market deals, spent his whole day mentally performing financial transactions. All purely imaginary, but completely real to him. An entire world of mental finance.
And he was always being robbed in this system.
Always robbed by an ominous dark power in the frame system, yeah, which conveniently ensured no money ever actually appeared in his real accounts. But to try and get something back from this imaginary system, he even ordered 10,000 euros worth of furniture delivered to his brother's address. Had to be returned, of course. The buyer just declares him completely insane for these actions. Huge disconnect from reality.
And these delusions had real consequences inside the Blacksite, too. The meat order.
Oh, yeah. Significantly impacted operations. One time, he made a mental transfer to his Blacksite account. Totally convinced the imaginary money was coming, he went on a feeding frenzy, ordered a 1,000 euros worth of fresh meat with a 3-day shelf life from the delivery service. Delivery arrived 6 days later. No money, obviously. Meat had to be sent back to Bavaria for disposal.
And that must have caused some changes.
Directly led to a new rule in Blacksite, Berlin. Patients could only order from the delivery service if they had the actual cash in hand. Small example, but shows how patient delusions directly forced the institution to adapt its logistics, even within its secretive setup.
But despite all this imaginary wealth disappearing, he still spent a lot of real money.
He did. actually spent much more money monthly than he was sufficiently entitled to, mostly on food,
Yeah.
like 5 large pizzas for dinner sometimes, €10 each. He claimed people owed him 4-figure sums from dubious deals, cocaine transactions, things like that, which they were repaying in installments. Hints of an illicit past still funding him.
And he had Bitcoin, too. Tried to access it.
Around $16,000 worth, apparently. Tried to transfer it using his smuggled phone, but got blocked by constant ID verification steps, video ID checks from banks, Bitcoin exchanges, because his actual national ID card was confiscated by the Blacksite to prevent escape. A practical barrier showing the systemic controls, even against digital money.
And the Counter-Strike story. That sounds wild.
His most absurd source of money, the buyer calls it, claimed he won a mask worth nearly €20,000 in a single game on Russian Counter-Strike servers years ago, hoped for a payout. The buyer found it extremely strange and unlikely, but reluctantly wrote an email in English for him describing the mask. Patient got discharged before any reply came, left the buyer forever curious if there was any truth to this fantasy digital fortune.
The 4 Blocks bouncer. His story shows that incredible ability of the mind to build these intricate alternative realities, even when locked up. His elaborate financial delusions, his resourceful, if criminal way of navigating the Blacksite. It paints this vivid picture of adaptation, psychological complexity, shows how people keep a sense of agency, justice, even wealth, inside a system that, to the buyer, works like a secret prison with its own bizarre logic, maybe influenced by a deep state that always seemed to steal his imaginary money. Okay, now we arrive at the teddy bear patient. And his story seems to be the trigger, the springboard for the buyer's most extensive and, frankly, scathing critique of the entire psychological profession. Reveals the real depth of his disillusionment with Blacksite Berlin's therapeutic approach and its nature as a secret prison.
Exactly. The buyer describes this patient, another African man, as nice but completely insane. Spent 3-4 years in the Blacksite. Yet despite being one of the craziest in the buyer's view, he had outside privileges, was close to release to a shared apartment. Which says something about the institution's assessment, right?
But his delusions were disruptive.
Aggressive. Very. Constantly heard imaginary voices from neighboring rooms racially insulting him. And his reaction. Storm into those rooms, threaten and hit whoever he found there. Led to frequent room changes, constant internal torment leading to external aggression. And this extended to his own stuff, the TVs.
Right.
3 separate times he heard imaginary police racially insulting him from his television, leading him to smash his own TV. 3 brand new TVs destroyed. A costly, repetitive pattern. Suggests this deep, unshakable internal battle being projected outwards.
But the ultimate excuse, the teddy bear.
Yeah.
This is what set the buyer off.
This was it, the trigger. When the buyer asked him why he kept smashing TVs, the patient first said he was insulted but did nothing. Push further, he points to a teddy bear on his pillow and declares, totally seriously, he was it. The buyer sarcastically suggested getting rid of the rampage-prone teddy bear because of the cost, but the patient wanted to keep it. And his family father was a successful musician, just kept providing new TVs, enabling the cycle. #tag the buyer's scathing critique of psychology. And this incident, the teddy bear excuse, is what completely captured the buyer's critical focus, sparked his most intense commentary. The patient told the psychologist about the teddy bear, and according to the buyer, they completely fell for it.
Fell for it. So the buyer saw this as the patient gaming the system.
Exactly. He believes the patient had deciphered the psychologist system, concluded that this kind of explanation, the teddy bear did it, makes perfect sense for psychologists, is absolutely credible from their viewpoint, and then the buyer just launches into this scathing assessment of what he calls the incompetence of psychology, believes they released the patient as harmless because they accepted the teddy bear was the culprit. He jokes the poor teddy bear probably still gets weekly therapy, a really sharp satirical jab.
Wow. So he traces this perceived incompetence back, way back.
All the way back to patient 0, the infamous Sigmund Freud, whose delusional concept of psychoanalysis, he claims, infected others globally, institutionalized delusional ideas, and declared them as science. He even connects it to his own diagnosis of contagious mental illness for supposedly infecting his mother. He found it laughable at first, but after his time in Blacksite Berlin, he claims he was massively wrong. Now believes mental illnesses are indeed contagious, observing how psychologists have obviously infected each other with delusional ideas, propagated them, made them a science. It's a deeply personal, highly provocative view born from profound disillusionment.
So for the buyer, psychology isn't a science at all.
A sham science. Scheinwissenschaft. A dead end. especially compared to neuroscience or AI, which he thinks are maybe decades from real solutions. He argues psychology won't advance even in 1,000 years because it's the completely wrong approach. The psyche, he insists, is in the neurons. That's where you have to look for errors. It's a very biological argument against the whole field.
And he thinks the psychologists themselves are unwell.
Worse than that, treatment-needing lunatics, a danger to society. He asserts recognizing madness is a natural ability everyone has, not a profession. Believes psychologists aren't even good at recognizing madness because they themselves are not insight-aware of their illness, are convinced of their delusion. Incredibly strong inflammatory accusation. Challenges their competence, their sanity.
And therapy itself. He calls it a fraud.
A fraud, yeah. States, with total conviction, never in human history has talking made anyone a tiny bit less crazy. Calls healing mental illness with words the pinnacle of megalomania, likens it to voodoo, spitting, laying on hands, healing crystals, all completely ineffective in his view. A direct indictment of talk therapy.
He uses satire too, right? The superhero analogy.
He does. Imagine psychologists as undercover superheroes with super psycho powers, telepathic abilities, magically fixing madness with golden words. Argues normal people can't do this because they're neither crazy nor megalomaniac.
And he demands accountability, accuses them of unproven fraud, malicious deception for self-enrichment, wants them held liable, assets seized, compensation paid, even implicates Big Pharma as an accomplice, selling ineffective snake oil.
He also critiques the diagnostic system, the ICD, points to the constant redefining of diseases, diagnoses in the ICD, claims patients can get 12 completely different diagnoses in 4 years, most likely none of which are accurate. Uses this analogy. If psychology's logic applied to physics, apples would fly up, down, sideways. The universe would explode. A powerful, humorous way to show his view of its inconsistency. And underlying all this critique is his own suffering. Describes being plagued by suffering and de facto psychologically tortured just by having to forcibly listen to superfluous nonsense from other patients, calls it real torture. Concludes anyone who voluntarily does that for 8 hours a day is definitely mentally ill. A profound personal indictment of the Blacksite's therapeutic environment and the staff.
This whole critique really sets the stage for how we understand the rest of his account of the Blacksite. But beyond this philosophical battle, there were more specific incidents with the teddy bear patient, the CBD grass.
Right. Another peculiar incident. On an excursion, the patient got some THC-free CBD grass buyer, equates it to non-alcoholic beer. Just wanted the feeling of weed without risking privileges. But despite 0 psychoactive ingredients, he got so high, he thought imaginary aliens were chasing him through Berlin.
Just from CBD?
Apparently. Collapsed when he got back to the Blacksite, saw huge, dark figures everywhere. Doctor found the CBD, drug test negative. They let him sleep off his imaginary high, but banned him from CBD grass. Shows the power of his delusions overriding reality.
And there's an alcohol incident, too.
On his birthday, yeah. Another patient gave him homemade grape juice alcohol. He drank about half, got aggressive, looking very mean, started threatening people. Next day, completely indignantly accused the guy who gave it to him of lacing it with opium, which wasn't true. Another instance of imagined effects, his mind creating explanations. The buyer concludes the patient should just avoid any ingredient-free, drug-like substances. Fears he'd have a 20-hour horror trip if someone told him a vitamin pill was ecstasy. Real drugs, the buyer warns, would definitely trigger real psychoses, maybe lead to new crimes. A pragmatic assessment of the risks with such a suggestible mind.
Okay, finally we get to a personal victory for the buyer, one that directly connects to this whole deep dive, right?
Exactly. The teddy bear patient's original offense was hitting someone during a delusion. Led to many years in the Blacksite for what the buyer calls a trifle, compared to other things. So about 3 months before this patient's release, the buyer gets moved to a new cell. Neighbor has a mobile Wi-Fi router, offers him a 5G flat rate for €20 a month. Buyer desperately needs a Wi-Fi device. An official Xbox One purchase, they'd remove the Wi-Fi chip, useless for him. A real dilemma.
But the teddy bear patient had an Xbox.
Yeah.
With the chip intact.
He did, and he was about to be released. The buyer saw his chance, offered him €300 for the console and 12 games. Patient joyfully agreed. The deal went undiscovered by the clinic, partly because the buyer already had approved Xbox apps and the patient was leaving soon anyway. Clever manipulation of the system.
And this is where the story comes full circle.
This is it. The powerful revelation. The buyer proudly states, "It was on this Xbox that I wrote this book." Reveals the extraordinary origins of the very account we're discussing. Highlights the buyer's incredible ingenuity, resourcefulness. exploiting the Blacksite system despite constant forced medication to document the facts as he saw them. His ability to game the system to write his story underscores the intelligence, the critical skepticism behind everything he observed, and how his will to expose it all led to this deep dive.
We've just navigated the truly unsettling corridors of Blacksite Berlin, guided by the unique first-hand perspective of the buyer from the World Succession Deed 1400. We've heard these harrowing tales: extreme paranoia, politically motivated violence, elaborate delusions, the peculiar ways people find or lose themselves inside such a system, all operating, he claims, under the shadow of an international deep state.
And through these personal stories, this powerful, provocative critique emerges. A critique of Blacksite Berlin itself and the entire field of psychology. The buyer, whose account we've presented as his factual record, really challenges us to reconsider what we mean by madness, healing, justice, especially when faced with an institution he sees as a sham science, a disguised secret prison serving hidden interests. His success in gaming the system to write his account, the source of our deep dive, just underscores the sharp intelligence and skepticism driving his observations.
But what this deep dive really reveals isn't just, a collection of sensational stories. It's a profound questioning of institutional authority, of the narratives we just accept as true. It pushes you, the listener, to ask, how do we critically evaluate these systems designed to contain and cure, especially when the systems themselves are perceived as flawed, maybe even diluted, and potentially serving hidden state interests, as the buyer describes?
Right. In a world where information feels increasingly controlled, where reality can be so subjective, how do we distinguish between genuine mental illness and maybe a radical, painful understanding of hidden truths? Especially when the institutions doing the diagnosing are themselves under scrutiny, perceived as secret prisons acting for a deep state. It leaves us with this really unsettling question. What would you do if you believed the system was designed specifically to stop you from revealing its true nature? How far would you go to get your story out?